Western world has always projected Greece as the foundation of not only Western philosophy but of world philosophy. To practice, we will find that what they practiced in Greece was not moral philosophy. And Plato is a very good example of someone who had a conscience, or whose conscience was awakened through looking at alternative forms of seeing and being. And first he was exposed to the philosophy that came out of Ionia. Was not part of Greece, but was a colonized state in Asia Minor by the Persians or Iranians today. He was initiated there into one of the secret societies, and later on when he went to Egypt, to Kemet, he was initiated under Isis, whose proper name is Isata. So he was interested in trying to reform the Greek political situation, in which, as I said earlier, 2/3 of the population of Athens were slaves. And he found that the people who formed the government were morally bankrupt, morally corrupt. Plato confided in his writings, letters, that he could not find a single person with whom he could converse about the implications of philosophy. He found that he was an alien in his own country, having been awakened to the generosity of having a conscience, of looking at the condition of your fellow man and making an attempt to make that poor, oppressed person's life better. And it's a very pervasive idea in Greek philosophy, because Socrates himself, in having a conversation with his friends, and one of his friends said, I would want to prosecute my father who punished a slave. And Socrates told him, why would he want to prosecute his father when the slave is only a mere slave? So even Socrates, as evolved as he was supposed to be as a philosopher, did not see the justification for a member of the subaltern class to respond to their treatment in a court of law. So that really typifies the worldview of the Greeks. They did not envisage a world in which there was a equal status in the society. The world that they lived, as opposed to envisaged, was one of exploitation of the masses. Another very good example of the bankruptcy of the Greek state is one of the early philosophers, Solon, who Socrates described as being a poet at one stage, but went into politics. He was contesting power in Greece politically, and he told his friends that when he comes to power, he would abolish debts and usury. So what his friends did, they borrowed an enormous amount of money, and when he came to power and abolished it, they gained significantly from that abolishment of the law. So just pointing out the moral bankruptcy, general moral bankruptcy that existed amongst the educated elite in Greece. And Plato came from a society like that and from a family like that. In fact, he was related to Solon via his mother, through his mother's side. So he found that it was impossible to practice this moral philosophy that he received via initiation. And so he fled to Italy on the invitation of his friend Dion to come and work with him in Italy. But when Plato reached there, he found it was the same type of political setup as in Greece. For example, the Greeks conquered the southern parts of Italy through war. The Phoenicians, who were fleeing the Assyrians from their homeland, migrated to Italy and settled peacefully amongst the southern Italians, as opposed to the Greeks who conquered states by war. So he found the very same thing that he was fleeing in Greece, operating by Greeks in Italy. This gives you a picture of the impossibility of expressing moral philosophy based on a concept of being equal, totally unknown to the Greek historical consciousness. And Plato became so disillusioned with politics, and with Greek politics in particular, and his governance, that he was like a model for the Fabians who came many centuries later, thousands of years later, who believed that you can change a society by taking on significant roles in the existing system and influencing it to change. The Fabians were a failure in doing so, and so was Plato. Plato advocated that they would take a philosopher to come to power in an ordinary type government and change it. But it was totally impossible, because when Solon did that, even the minimum changes that he advocated for Greece, minimum, he had to flee Greece for his life and went to Kemet for 12 years. He had to flee because they would kill him for making those changes. So the Greek political situation was not given to the growth of moral philosophy. It was inimical to moral philosophy because the governance of the society was based upon slavery, which was a constitutional reality and not somebody's thought. In the Constitution, slavery was endorsed. In Sparta, another one of the Greek independent states, they colonized the Helots and made them slaves for 1,000 years until they revolt. They treated them extremely badly. They had them placed in the military from the age of 7 until they were 30. They were isolated from anybody else. They couldn't have relations with women. So being in the army at a very young age, from the age of 7, it would mean that in their sexual maturity, the age of 16, 17, 18, that was expressed through other men. So it was endemic in the Greek city-states that homosexuality was part and parcel of the lifestyle of those people, simply because the youth were cut off from relating to the opposite sex because they were placed in the military from the age of 7 until they were 30 years old. So then homosexuality begins to define the condition of Greeks, and it became a social tradition in the society. This is why we find we have found that homosexuality is now once again trying to be a legal thing, and it is legal in many states, simply because once you've been molested at a very young age, you have no alternative but to do the same thing to others, and it's passed on like that. It's something that's endemic in the society, in which the abused becomes the abuser. It's a classic model in psychology, in psychoanalysis, whereby the abused becomes himself or herself an abuser. So given that context in which Greece is not given to holistic relationships between man and woman, woman is seen as other. She is seen as not having the same value as a man. And not only that, she portends danger. When Pandora came on the scene, when you open the box, it was diseases and death. Pandora represented that. In the ancient times, around 250 BC, the female could light, as the only thing she could do is light the family hearth for the ancestors. Apart from that, she could do nothing else. All of the inheritance is passed on to the male. All of the duties fall onto the male. When the female marries, she takes on the family identity of her husband's family or her husband's clan. She no longer is a part of the family she was biologically part of. So this is the condition that the rest of Europe inherited as a model, and up until the early 20th century, you could see the suffragettes chaining themselves in protest at their condition. The vote, I think, was granted to women in the UK around 1928. It wasn't granted to women in Switzerland until 1971. So we are saying that we have two separate cradles, two separate philosophical cradles, in which oppression was the norm, and the other in which the serf or the person in a lowly position can work his way up to become even a jati or a governor in Kemet or in Africa. Even a slave in traditional Africa can become a king, as in the case of King Jaja of Opobo. He was enslaved as a young man, became an enslaver himself, but also became king. Once you are a chattel slave in the Western world, from Greco-Roman times up until the 1/3 of the 19th century, there was absolutely no hope of you becoming anything other than a slave. You couldn't, regardless of the immense contributions made by Africans who were enslaved, to medicine, to science, to the crafts, to the arts. All of those things were ignored and usurped by the slave owner. So there's a total difference in orientation, in development, in worldview from the world of the Greeks and the world of Kemet and the world of Africa and the rest of Western Europe. Totally different. So it is therefore impossible, totally impossible, for Greeks to have evolved moral philosophy, because his whole entire society was based on exploitation of the many, and the small numbers were the nobles and occupied the higher echelons of Greek society, the Greek city-states. And that is a fundamental fact when we're talking about philosophy, between that of the Greeks and that of the Africans. And this carries on today with the same ruthlessness in the church from the 12th century to the 18th century, capturing people, murdering people in mass, millions of people devastated, your gold taken, given to the church, your land taken, given to the church. All those things were part and parcel of the philosophical development of Europe. A philosophy of marauding, a philosophy of murder, a philosophy of death, and a philosophy of the minority ruling the majority. That remains today in our societies. The same thing obtains. It has not changed fundamentally for the last 2,500 years.